In the forgotten mountains of 1880s Wyoming, two sisters stood on the porch of a crumbling shack that was their only inheritance. The cabin was worthless, everyone said so. The land beneath it, barren and rocky, had been passed over by every prospector who'd ever set eyes on it. Sarah and Emma Hayes had nothing but each other and that rotting structure clinging to the mountainside. They didn't know that beneath those splintered floorboards lay enough gold to change their lives forever. When a wealthy cowboy named James Cordell rode into their valley with cash in hand and interest in their land, the sisters faced an impossible choice. Was he their salvation or their ruin? What did he really know about the ground beneath their feet? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The tarnished silver locket lay open in Sarah Hayes's palm, catching the dim light that filtered through the boarding house window. Inside, two faded photographs stared back at her. Her mother's face, young and hopeful, before the frontier had worn her down to nothing. Her father, strong-shouldered and proud, before the mountain took everything he had to give. Sarah closed the locket with a soft click and tucked it beneath her collar, feeling its cool weight against her skin. 6 months had passed since they'd buried their mother in the hard ground outside Timber Ridge. The winter had been cruel, and pneumonia had settled into her lungs like an unwelcome visitor who refused to leave. Sarah had sat beside the bed those final weeks, watching her mother's breath grow shallower, listening to her whisper things that made no sense. Fever talk, the doctor had said. But Sarah remembered one phrase clearly. Your father knew. He always knew. Knew what? The question had haunted Sarah through the long months of grief. Emma sat on the narrow bed they shared, mending a tear in her only good days. At 28, she still possessed the kind of beauty that made men turn their heads in the street. Fair-haired and gentle-eyed, she moved through the world with a lightness that Sarah envied. Sarah, at 32, carried herself differently, practical, guarded. The elder sister who had learned young that hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. Do you remember, Emma said quietly, not looking up from her needle, when Papa used to take us up the mountain? Before Mama got sick the first time. Sarah moved to the window, looking out over the muddy main street of Timber Ridge. The town wasn't much. The row of wooden buildings, false-fronted and weather-beaten. The general store, the saloon, the land office, the bank. A church at the north end with a steeple that listed slightly to the left. Maybe 200 souls called this place home, and most of them were just passing through on their way to somewhere better. I remember, Sarah said. He'd point out plants, teach us which ones were good for eating, which ones would make you sick. He knew every rock, every tree. He loved that mountain. It killed him, Emma, same as it killed Mama, in the end. Emma's hands stilled on the fabric. That's not fair, Sarah. The cave-in killed him. That was 7 years ago. Mama died of pneumonia. Mama died of a broken heart, Sarah said, turning from the window. She never recovered after we lost him. You know that as well as I do. The silence that followed was heavy with truth. Their father had been prospecting, always prospecting, convinced that the mountain held something valuable. He'd spent years digging, panning, following every glint of color in the creek bed. And then one day, the tunnel he'd been working collapsed. It took 3 days to dig him out, and by then it was too late. Their mother had tried to keep the family together after that, but grief had hollowed her out. She'd taken work as a seamstress, and the sisters had done what they could, washing clothes, cleaning houses, whatever would put food on the table, but it was never enough. When their mother finally let go, Sarah felt almost relieved. At least she wasn't suffering anymore. Mr. Patterson wants to see us, Emma said, breaking the silence. About Mama's will. Abraham Patterson was the town's only lawyer, a thin man with wire spectacles who handled property disputes and last testaments. Sarah had been putting off the meeting, knowing there would be nothing good waiting for them. Their mother had died owing money to half the merchants in town. This afternoon, 3 o'clock. Sarah nodded. They'd go, hear whatever there was to hear, and then figure out what came next. Maybe they'd have to leave Timber Ridge altogether, head east to Denver or south to Santa Fe, find work in a city where no one knew them, where they could start fresh without the weight of their family's failures hanging around their necks. The afternoon sun was slanting long across the mountains when they walked to Patterson's office. The lawyer's room sat above the land office, accessed by an outside staircase that creaked under their feet. Inside, the smell of old paper and tobacco smoke hung in the air. Patterson gestured to 2 chairs across from his desk. He was a meticulous man, everything about him ordered and precise. His desk held neat stacks of documents, each tied with string. A ledger sat open before him, entries recorded in careful script. "Miss Hayes, Miss Emma," he said, settling his spectacles more firmly on his nose. "Thank you for coming. I know this has been a difficult time." Sarah waited. In her experience, lawyers didn't waste words on sympathy unless they were preparing you for bad news. Patterson opened a thin folder. "Your mother's estate is, I'm afraid, quite modest. There are outstanding debts. The boarding house, Mrs. Talbot, is owed 3 months' rent. The general store has an account of $12.40. Dr. Morrison's bill for the final illness comes to $18. Emma's hand found Sarah's under the table, squeezed tight. "However," Patterson continued, "there is one asset, a property deed." Sarah leaned forward. "What property?" "The mountain tract. 20 acres on the eastern slope, about 3 hours' ride from town. Your father filed the claim in 1871, built a cabin on it. After his death, the property passed to your mother. Now it comes to you. The mountain, of course, that cursed piece of ground that had consumed their father's life and left them with nothing but grief. Is it worth anything?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Patterson's expression said everything. "The land has been surveyed. The soil is poor, rocky, no water access beyond a small creek. The cabin your father built is, by all accounts, in significant disrepair. Several parties examined the property for mining potential over the years. Nothing substantial was ever found. So it's worthless," Sarah said flatly. "I wouldn't say worthless. Land has intrinsic value, but it's not desirable property. No, you might find a buyer eventually, though I wouldn't expect much. Perhaps enough to settle your mother's debts, if you're fortunate." Emma spoke for the first time. "Could we live there?" Both Sarah and Patterson turned to look at her. "The cabin," Emma continued. "If it's ours, couldn't we fix it up, live there instead of paying rent?" "Emma," Sarah said quietly, "you heard him. It's falling apart." "But it's ours, Sarah. It belonged to Papa. Maybe there's something there, something he saw that others missed." Patterson cleared his throat. "I should mention that the property taxes are current through the end of the year. After that, you'll owe approximately $6 annually, if you choose to keep it." Sarah looked at the deed Patterson slid across the desk. The paper was yellowed, her father's signature bold across the bottom. Jacob Hayes. He'd been so certain, so convinced that the mountain would make their fortune, and it had killed him instead. "We'll need to see it," Sarah said. "Before we decide anything, of course, I can arrange for someone to escort you up the trail. It's rough country." "We know the way," Sarah said. She'd been there once, years ago, when her father was still alive. She remembered the cabin perched on the slope, remembered the view that stretched forever across the valley. She remembered her father's eyes, bright with dreams that would never come true. They left Patterson's office with the deed and a heavy silence between them. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, beautiful and indifferent. "We should at least look at it," Emma said as they walked back toward the boarding house. "Before we sell, there's nothing there, Emma." "You heard Patterson. Prospectors have been over every inch of that mountain. Then why did Papa spend so many years there? Why was he so sure?" Sarah had no answer for that. Their father had been main things. Stubborn, certainly. A dreamer, absolutely, but he hadn't been a fool. He'd understood rock and soil, could read the land like other men read books. If he'd been convinced the mountain held gold, he must have had reasons. "One visit," Sarah said finally. "We'll go up, look at the cabin, and then we'll sell it to whoever will take it." "Agreed," Emma nodded, but Sarah could see the hope kindling in her sister's eyes. That dangerous, foolish hope that had destroyed their father and broken their mother's heart. The next morning brought clouds and the smell of rain. Sarah woke early, as she always did, and lay in the grey light, listening to Emma's gentle breathing. The boarding house was stirring around them. Footsteps in the hallway, the creak of floorboards, the distant clatter of pots in Mrs. Talbot's kitchen. They couldn't stay here much longer, not without money to pay the rent. Mrs. Talbot had been patient, but patience wore thin when creditors came calling. Sarah had seen the way the landlady looked at them lately, a mixture of pity and calculation. How long before they were asked to leave? She rose quietly, dressed in the dim light. Her wardrobe was simple, 2 dresses, one for every day and one for church, a woolen shawl that had belonged to her mother, sturdy boots that needed resoling. Everything she owned could fit in a single carpet bag. Downstairs she found Mrs. Talbot in the kitchen, kneading dough for the morning's bread. The woman was thick-waisted and practical, her grey hair pinned severely back. She'd run the boarding house for 15 years, since her husband died in a logging accident. She knew hardship when she saw it. "Coffee's on the stove," Mrs. Talbot said without looking up. "Help yourself." Sarah poured a cup and sat at the small table by the window. Through the glass she could see Main Street beginning to wake. Old Tom Brennan, the sheriff, making his morning rounds. A wagon rattling past, loaded with supplies. 2 cowboys riding in from somewhere, their horses tired and dusty. "I heard you saw Patterson yesterday," Mrs. Talbot said. Still working the dough, news traveled fast in a small town. Sarah wasn't surprised. "We did. Mama left us some land, the mountain property." It wasn't a question. Everyone in Timber Ridge knew about Jacob Hayes and his obsession with that barren slope. "That's right." Mrs. Talbot shaped the dough into loaves, set them aside to rise. She wiped her hands on her apron and poured herself coffee, joined Sarah at the table. "You planning to sell it?" "Probably. There's nothing up there but rocks and memories." The older woman studied her over the rim of her cup. "Your father was convinced otherwise." "My father died in a collapsed tunnel, chasing a dream that didn't exist. Maybe, or maybe he just ran out of time." Mrs. Talbot set down her cup. "I knew your parents, Sarah, long before you were born. Your father wasn't a fool, stubborn, yes. But he had a sense about these things. He could look at ground and know what was underneath. Then why didn't he find anything? He spent years up there." "I don't know, but I remember something he said once, years back. He was in town buying supplies, and someone was ribbing him about wasting his time. Your father just smiled and said, 'The mountain keeps its secrets until it's ready to share them.'" Sarah felt a chill despite the warm kitchen. Those were almost the exact words her mother had whispered in her fever. "The mountain keeps its secrets." "What do you think he meant?" Sarah asked. Mrs. Talbot shrugged. "Can't say, but I'd think twice before selling that land too quick. You might want to see what you've got first." Emma appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown, hair loose around her shoulders. "Is there coffee?" The moment passed. Sarah poured her sister a cup, and they sat together while Mrs. Talbot went back to her bread. Outside, the sky was darkening, heavy with the promise of rain. By afternoon, the dirt streets would be mud, and the mountain trail would be treacherous. "We should wait a day or two," Sarah said, "before going up to see the property, until the weather clears." Emma nodded, but she was looking out the window with that distant expression Sarah knew well. She was already up there in her mind, walking through the cabin their father had built, imagining what might be possible. At the general store later that morning, Sarah went to settle what they could of their mother's account. Mrs. Kettering stood behind the counter, a sharp-eyed woman who never missed a detail. The store smelled of coffee and tobacco, dried goods and leather. "Miss Hayes," Mrs. Kettering said, her tone neither warm nor cold, "I heard about your mother's passing, My condolences. Thank you. I came to discuss the account. Mrs. Kettering pulled out a ledger, ran her finger down a column of figures. $12.40, most of it from the last 2 months. Medicine, mostly, and some food items. Sarah counted out what coins she had. $6.20. Everything she'd managed to save from her work cleaning the schoolhouse. This is what I can offer now. I'll have the rest within the month. Mrs. Kettering looked at the coins, then at Sarah. After a long moment, she swept the money into her cash drawer. That'll do for now, the rest when you can manage it. It was more grace than Sarah had expected. I appreciate your patience. Your mother was a good woman. Life dealt her a hard hand. Mrs. Kettering closed the ledger. I hear you inherited the mountain property. Word travels fast. It's a small town, dear. Not much else to talk about. The store owner leaned against the counter. You'll have visitors soon, I expect. Once word gets out that you own that land. Visitors? People interested in buying. There's always someone looking for cheap property, even if it's worthless. You'd be wise to think carefully before you sell. Sarah studied the older woman's face. Do you know something about that land? Mrs. Kettering straightened, busied herself arranging tins on a shelf. I know your father believed in it. I know he died believing. That ought to count for something. It was the second time that morning someone had suggested the land might be worth more than it appeared. Sarah felt a prickle of unease, or perhaps it was something else. Curiosity, maybe, or that dangerous ember of hope she'd been trying to extinguish. She bought a few supplies with the little money she had left. Cornmeal, salt, a bit of dried beef, enough to get them through a few more days. As she was leaving, the bell above the door chimed and a man entered. Sarah stepped aside to let him pass. He was tall, well-dressed in a way that marked him as an outsider. Dark coat, clean shirt, boots that had seen use but were well-maintained. He carried himself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Mid-30s, Sarah guessed, with dark hair and eyes that took in everything at once. Ma'am, he said, touching the brim of his hat as he passed. Sarah nodded and stepped out into the street. Behind her she heard Mrs. Kettering's voice, bright and curious. Can I help you, sir? I'm looking for information about property in the area, land that might be available for purchase. Sarah paused on the boardwalk, adjusting her packages. She shouldn't eavesdrop, but something made her linger. Well now, Mrs. Kettering said, that depends on what kind of property you're after. Ranch land, mining claims. I'm interested in mountain properties. Eastern Slope, specifically. I understand there are some parcels that might be available. There might be, though I'd have to check with the land office to be sure. I heard mention of the Hayes property, 20 acres, with an old cabin. Do you know if the owners might be willing to sell? Sarah's breath caught. This stranger, who'd just arrived in town, was asking about their land specifically, not just any property. The Hayes sisters just inherited that land, Miss Kettering said, her voice carefully neutral. Their mother passed recently. I couldn't say what their intentions are. I see. Would you be able to point me toward them? I'd like to make an offer. They're staying at Mrs. Talbot's boarding house. But, sir, if you don't mind my asking, what's your interest in that particular piece of ground? It's not what anyone would call prime real estate. There was a pause. Sarah imagined the stranger's smile, calculated and pleasant. I'm a land investor, ma'am. I buy properties with potential, hold them, improve them when I can. That mountain tract might suit my purposes. I see. Well, you'll find the boarding house at the end of Main Street. Can't miss it. Sarah hurried away before the man could emerge and find her standing there like a fool. Her heart was pounding as she reached the boarding house. Emma was in their room, sitting by the window with her mending. She looked up as Sarah burst through the door. What's wrong? Sarah set down her packages and moved to the window, peering down at the street. There's a man, a stranger. He just arrived in town and he's asking about our land. Emma joined her at the window. What kind of man? Well-dressed. Confident. He told Mrs. Kettering he's a land investor. Sarah turned to her sister. Emma, he asked about our property specifically. By name. The Hayes property. How would a stranger know about our land the same day we inherited it? Emma's brow furrowed. Amy Patterson mentioned it to someone. Why would he? And why would anyone care about a worthless piece of mountain? They watched the street below. After a few minutes, the stranger emerged from the general store and stood on the boardwalk, looking up and down Main Street. Even from this distance, Sarah could see his thoughtful expression, the way he carried himself. This was not a man who did anything without purpose. He started walking toward the boarding house. He's coming here, Emma whispered. Let me do the talking, Sarah said. The knock came a few minutes later. Mrs. Talbot's voice called up the stairs. Miss Hayes? Miss Emma? You have a visitor. The sisters descended together. The stranger stood in Mrs. Talbot's front parlor, hat in hand. Up close, Sarah could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 35 at most. His face was clean-shaven, his eyes a deep brown that seemed to take in every detail. Miss Hayes, he said, inclining his head. Miss Emma, my name is James Cordell. I apologize for the intrusion, but I was hoping I might have a word with you both. About our land, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am. I understand you recently inherited a property on the eastern slope. I'm interested in purchasing it if you're willing to sell. We only just learned we owned it yesterday, Sarah said. How did you know about it? James Cordell smiled, and it was disarming in its warmth. I've been traveling through this territory for several months, looking at various properties. I make it my business to know what land might become available. When I heard that Mrs. Hayes had passed, I inquired at the land office about her holdings. It was a reasonable explanation, almost too reasonable. Why that property specifically? Sarah asked. By all accounts, it's worthless. I wouldn't say worthless, Miss Hayes. All land has value. Some just requires more vision to see it. He gestured to the chairs. May we sit? I'd like to make you an offer. Sarah glanced at Emma, who nodded slightly. They sat, and James Cordell settled across from them, perfectly at ease. I'm prepared to offer you $500 for the property, he said. Cash, to be paid immediately upon transfer of the deed. The number hung in the air like something physical. $500. More money than Sarah had seen in her entire life. It would pay off all their mother's debts and leave enough to start fresh somewhere else. It would solve every immediate problem they had. That's very generous, Emma said softly. It's too generous, Sarah said, watching James Cordell's face. For land that's supposedly worthless. Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, perhaps. You're a shrewd woman, Miss Hayes. Very well. I believe the land has potential that others have overlooked. I'm willing to pay for that potential. What kind of potential? Ranch land primarily. With some development, it could support grazing. The creek provides water, minimal though it is. The mountain provides shelter from the worst weather. It's not prime property, but it has uses. Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying him. Every word he spoke sounded true, but there was something underneath. Something he wasn't saying. We'd like to see the property before we make any decisions. Of course, I'd be happy to escort you there myself. Tomorrow, perhaps, if the weather holds. That won't be necessary. We know the way. James Cordell nodded slowly. As you wish. But Miss Hayes, I should mention that my offer won't stand indefinitely. I'm prepared to hold it for a week, he said. After that, I'll need to move on to other opportunities. I hope you understand. We understand perfectly, Mr. Cordell, Sarah said, rising. Thank you for your offer. We'll consider it carefully. He stood as well, and for a moment they faced each other across Mrs. Talbot's parlor. He was taller than Sarah by half a foot, but she didn't let herself be intimidated. She'd dealt with men who thought they could overwhelm women with presence and confidence. It rarely worked with her. "I'm staying at the hotel," James said. "Should you have any questions, or should you decide to accept my offer, you can find me there." He turned to Emma, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Emma, a pleasure to meet you both." After he left, Emma turned to Sarah with wide eyes. $500, Sarah. Do you know what we could do with that money?" "I know exactly what we could do, which is why I want to know why he's offering it." Sarah moved to the window, watched James Cordell walk back down Main Street toward the hotel. Something isn't right about this. Maybe he's just what he says, a land investor with money to spend. Maybe that land is worth more than anyone's been telling her. That evening Sarah couldn't settle her mind. She kept thinking about her father, about the years he'd spent on that mountain, about the certainty in his eyes when he talked about what he'd find there, about her mother's fever words. "The mountain keeps its secret." She waited until Emma was asleep, then slipped downstairs and out into the night. The streets of Timber Ridge were quiet, most folks already in bed. A lamp burned in the window of the saloon, and she could hear rough laughter from inside. Otherwise the town was dark and still. The land office was locked, but Sarah knew the deputy land clerk, Billy Morton, who lived in rooms above the building. She knocked on his door until he answered, bleary-eyed and suspicious. "Miss Hayes, what in blazes are you doing here at this hour?" "I need to see the records, Billy, for my father's claim. It's near midnight. Can't this wait until morning?" Sarah pulled out $2 from the small stash she kept hidden in her boot. "Please, Billy, it's important." Money had a way of making things possible. Billy took the coins and led her downstairs, unlocking the office and lighting a lamp. The room smelled of dust and old paper. Maps hung on the walls, showing the territory divided into careful squares and parcels. "What exactly are you looking for?" Billy asked, pulling out a drawer of files. "My father's original claim, and any other claims filed in that area. I want to know who else has looked at that land." Billy found the file and spread it on the desk. Sarah leaned over the documents, studying them in the lamplight. Her father's claim, filed in the boundaries marked clearly. The cabin registered as a permanent structure in 1872. "Are there other claims nearby?" she asked. Billy pulled out a map, traced his finger along the mountain range. "Here's your father's parcel, and here, about a mile west, there was a claim filed in 63. That was the Thornton brothers. They pulled out maybe $2,000 in place of gold before the easy pickings ran out." "What about east of our land?" "Nothing filed. It's all still public domain. Your father's claim was the easternmost on that slope." Sarah studied the map, trying to understand what she was seeing. If there had been gold nearby, why hadn't anyone claimed the adjacent land? Unless they thought there was nothing more to find. Unless they'd given up too soon. "Has anyone else been looking at these records recently?" she asked. Billy scratched his chin. "Funny you should ask. That fellow Cordell, the one who just rode into town, he was here yesterday, spent an hour looking at survey maps of the eastern range." "Did he look at my father's claim specifically?" "Can't say for certain, but he was mighty interested in that area." Sarah barely slept that night. She lay in the darkness, listening to Emma breathe, turning over everything she'd learned. James Cordell had been studying maps before he ever approached them. He'd come to Timber Ridge with specific intentions, specific knowledge. The question was, what exactly did he know? By dawn, she'd made her decision. They needed to see the property before they made any choice about selling. Not in a week, not when the weather cleared. Today, Emma woke to find Sarah already dressed, packing supplies into a worn saddlebag. "What are you doing?" "We're going up the mountain." "This morning, but the weather. You said we should wait." "I changed my mind." Sarah handed Emma her practical dress, the one she wore for hard work. "Get dressed. We're leaving within the hour." They didn't own horses, but Sarah arranged to rent 2 mares from the livery stable. Old Tom Brennan saw them preparing to ride out and stopped by, his weathered face concerned. "You girls heading up to your father's old claim?" "We are," Sarah said, checking the cinch on her saddle. "That's rough country. Trails probably washed out in places after the spring rains. You want company?" Sarah appreciated the offer, but she wanted to see the property with clear eyes, without anyone else's opinions coloring what they found. "We'll manage, Sheriff. We've ridden that trail before. That was years ago, when you were girls and your father was alive. Things change," but he could see she'd made up her mind. "At least take this." He handed her an old revolver. "You know how to use it. Papa taught me." "Good. There's been reports of cats in those hills. And sometimes men are more dangerous than animals. You see any trouble, you fire 3 shots. I'll hear it and come running." They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern peaks, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. The air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of pine and sage. Sarah had forgotten how beautiful the country was when you got away from town, how vast and wild it stretched in every direction. The trail started easy, following the creek through stands of aspen and cottonwood. But as they climbed, the path narrowed and steepened. The horses picked their way carefully over loose rock and exposed roots. Emma rode behind, quiet and focused on not falling. After 2 hours, they stopped to rest the horses and drink from their canteens. Below them, Timber Ridge was a small collection of buildings, toy-like in the distance. Above them, the mountain rose sharp and gray against the blue sky. "Do you remember anything about the cabin?" Emma asked. "Not much. I was only here once. I remember Papa was excited, showing us the tunnel he'd started. Mama was worried. She didn't like us being up here. She was always worried. She had cause to be." They rode on. The trail grew rougher, and twice they had to dismount and lead the horses over particularly treacherous sections. Sarah's legs ached, and her hands were raw from gripping the reins, but she pushed forward. She needed to see this place, needed to understand what their father had died for. It was nearly noon when they rounded a bend and saw the cabin. Sarah pulled up short and Emma drew alongside her. The structure was worse than she'd remembered, or perhaps time had been crueler than she'd imagined. The roof sagged dangerously in the middle, covered in moss and missing shingles. One wall leaned outward, held in place by nothing more than habit and luck. The windows were empty of glass, dark squares that looked like hollow eyes. The front porch had collapsed on one side, the boards gray and rotting. "Oh," Emma said softly. "Oh, Sarah." It was a ruin. A monument to failed dreams and wasted years. Sarah felt something break inside her, some last fragile hope she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. This was what their father had given his life for. This wreck of wood and nails clinging to the mountainside like a dying thing that didn't know enough to let go. She dismounted and tied her horse to a tree. Emma followed. They approached the cabin slowly, as if it might collapse at any moment. The door hung askew on rusted hinges. Sarah pushed it open carefully, testing each step before putting her full weight down. The floorboards creaked and groaned, but held. Inside, the cabin was a single room, maybe 20 feet square. Light streamed through the broken windows and gaps in the roof, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. A rough table stood against one wall, covered in animal droppings and leaves blown in through the windows. 2 chairs, one missing a leg, an iron stove in the corner, rusted and listing, a wooden bed frame without a mattress. Everything their father had owned, left to decay when he died. Emma moved to the back wall, running her hand along the rough logs. "He built this with his own hands, and for what?" Sarah's voice came out harsher than she intended. "Look at it, Emma. This is what killed him, this dream that was never real. We don't know that. We don't know what he might have found if he'd had more time." Sarah was about to respond when she heard it. Hoofbeats on the trail below. She moved quickly to the window and looked down the slope. A rider was coming up the mountain. Even from this distance, She recognized the black stallion and the way the man sat his saddle. James Cordell. He followed us, Sarah said. Emma joined her at the window. Maybe he was just concerned. The sheriff might have told him we'd ridden out alone, or maybe he wanted to see what we'd do, what we'd find. They watched him approach. He rode with the ease of a man who'd spent considerable time in the saddle, despite his fine clothes and soft hands. When he reached the clearing, he dismounted and tied his horse beside theirs. "Miss Hayes, Miss Emma," he called out. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. Sheriff Brennan mentioned you'd ridden up here. I thought you might appreciate an escort back to town." Given the rough trail, Sarah stepped out onto the sagging porch. "That's thoughtful, Mr. Cordell, but we can manage on our own," he smiled. That same disarming expression he'd used in Mrs. Talbot's parlor. "I'm sure you can. Still, it's a long ride, and the afternoon storms can come up quickly in these mountains." He gestured to the cabin. "May I? I'm curious to see the property I'm hoping to purchase." Sarah wanted to refuse, but Emma spoke first. "Of course. Please come in." James climbed the porch steps carefully, testing each board before trusting it with his weight. Inside, he stood for a long moment, looking around the ruined space. His expression was thoughtful, almost calculating, as if he were seeing something the sisters couldn't. He walked to the back wall, the same place Emma had touched. He ran his hand along the logs, then tapped the wood with his knuckle. The sound was hollow, different from the solid thunk of the other walls. "Your father was a determined man," James said, "building up here, so far from town. It must have taken months of hauling supplies up that trail." "He was convinced there was gold," Sarah said, watching him carefully. "He spent years looking for it." "And did he find any? If he did, we never saw evidence of it. Just this cabin and the tunnel he was digging when he died." James turned to face them. "A tunnel? Where?" Sarah pointed to the back wall. "Behind there, I think. He'd mentioned it when we visited, but I never saw it. I was young, and Mama kept us outside most of the time." James moved closer to the wall, examining it more carefully. He pulled a knife from his belt and worked the blade between two logs. The wood was soft with rot, and a section came away easily. Behind it was darkness, and the faint smell of damp earth. "There's definitely something back here," he said. He glanced at Sarah. "Do you have a lantern?" "No, we didn't plan on staying long. I have one on my horse. With your permission, I'd like to investigate." Sarah hesitated. Something about his eagerness bothered her, the way his eyes lit up when he found the hidden passage. But she also wanted to know what was back there, what her father had been working on all those years. "Go ahead," she said finally, "but we're coming with you." James nodded and went to retrieve his lantern. While he was gone, Emma gripped Sarah's arm. "What if there's something there? What if Papa was right? Then we'll know. Either way, we deserve to see what he died for." James returned with a lantern and matches. He lit the wick and adjusted the flame, then carefully removed more of the rotted wood from the wall. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to pass through sideways. He held the lantern into the darkness. "It's a tunnel," he said, "hand-dug, by the look of it. Goes back at least 20 feet before it turns." He glanced at the sisters. "The air seems fresh enough, but I should go first. Check for cave-ins or unstable sections." Sarah didn't like the idea of letting him explore alone, but the practical part of her knew he was right. If the tunnel collapsed, better it be on one person than all three. "Be careful." James squeezed through the opening and disappeared into the darkness. The lantern light receded, casting strange shadows on the cabin wall. Sarah and Emma waited, listening to the scrape of his boots on stone, the occasional grunt of effort as he navigated the passage. Minutes passed. Then they heard his voice, distant and echoing. "You need to see this." Sarah looked at Emma. "Stay here." "Absolutely not. We're in this together." They entered the tunnel one at a time. It was tight and low, forcing them to stoop. The walls were rough rock, showing the marks of pick and shovel, their father's work, carved out of the mountain inch by inch. The floor was uneven, scattered with loose stones and debris. The tunnel ran straight for perhaps 15 feet, then curved to the right. Sarah could see the lantern glow ahead and James's silhouette. She rounded the corner and stopped. The tunnel opened into a small chamber, maybe 10 feet across. James stood in the center, holding the lantern high. The walls here were different, showing layers of rock in various shades of gray and white, and running through one section, catching the light like captured fire, was a vein of something that glittered. "Is that?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. James moved closer to the wall, examining the vein with an expert eye. He pulled his knife again and scraped at the rock. Flakes of gold dust fell to the ground, genuine and unmistakable. "Your father found it," James said quietly. "He found the source." Sarah's legs suddenly felt weak. She steadied herself against the tunnel wall. All these years, everyone had believed Jacob Hayes was chasing a dream, that he'd wasted his life on a worthless mountain. But he'd been right. He'd found what he was looking for. "How much is there?" Sarah asked, her voice rough. James examined the vein carefully, following it with the lantern light. "Hard to say without a proper survey, but this vein is at least 3 inches wide and runs along this wall for 6 or 7 feet. If it continues deeper into the mountain, and if the quality is consistent, it could be substantial." "Why didn't he tell anyone?" Emma asked. "Why did he keep digging in secret?" "He was protecting it," James. "Once word gets out about a gold find, every prospector within 100 miles descends on the area. Men stake claims on adjacent land, hoping the vein continues onto their property. There are disputes. Your father was probably waiting until he had a better sense of what he'd found before making it public." Sarah studied James's face in the flickering lamplight. "But you knew, somehow you knew there was gold here." He met her eyes steadily. "I suspected. I didn't know for certain." "How did you suspect?" James was quiet for a moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. "My father was a geologist. He surveyed this region in the 1860s, before I was born. He believed there was a significant gold deposit somewhere in these mountains, based on the rock formations and the placer gold that had been found nearby. But he died before he could complete his survey." "And you've been looking for it ever since," Sarah said. "I've been looking for 3 years, following his notes, studying survey maps, talking to old prospectors." He gestured to the glittering vein. "This is what I've been searching for." The silence in the chamber stretched long. Sarah could hear water dripping somewhere deeper in the mountain, the sound echoing off stone. She could smell damp earth and something metallic that might have been the gold itself. Her father had stood in this very spot, had seen this same glittering vein, had known his years of work had finally paid off. And then he'd died, and the secret had died with him. "So what now?" Sarah asked. "You still want to buy the property?" James turned to face her, and in the lamplight, his expression was serious. "That depends on you, Miss Hayes. I came here prepared to make an offer on what I thought was potential. Now we know it's more than potential. It's real, which makes the land worth considerably more than $500. Considerably more." "Yes." Emma moved closer to the vein, reaching out to touch it with her fingertips. "It's beautiful. Papa would have been so proud." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. Pride, grief, anger, all mixed together. Their father had found his fortune and never lived to enjoy it. Never got to see his daughters provided for. His wife comfortable in her final years. He died in a collapsed tunnel, just feet away from everything he'd dreamed of. "We need to think about this carefully," Sarah said. "We can't make decisions standing in a dark tunnel." "Agreed," James said. "But Miss Hayes, I should tell you something. Once people know there's gold here, this mountain will be overrun. You'll need to file your claim officially, get proper surveys done, establish clear boundaries, and you'll need to work the claim quickly before others try to stake adjacent properties." "We don't know anything about mining," Emma said. "No, but I do." James looked between them. "I'd like to propose a partnership. Not a sale, but a joint venture. You provide the land, I provide the expertise and equipment. We split the proceeds fairly." Sarah studied him. "How fairly?" 60% to you, 40 to me. It's your land, your father's discovery. I'm offering knowledge and capital. It was generous, more generous than Sarah had expected. But she'd learned not to trust things that seemed too good. And if we refuse, if we want to work the claim ourselves, that's your right. But gold mining isn't like panning a creek. You need equipment, expertise, workers. You need to shore up these tunnels properly, or they'll collapse. You need to extract the ore, process it, transport it to an assayer. All of that takes money and knowledge. Money we don't have, Emma said quietly. Money you could get from my offer, James said. $500 would be enough to hire workers and buy basic equipment, but you'd be learning as you went, making mistakes that could cost you more than money. They could cost lives. Sarah walked to the tunnel entrance, looking back toward the cabin. The afternoon light was slanting lower now, painting everything in amber. They'd need to start back to town soon if they wanted to make it before dark. Give us a day to discuss it, she said. We'll have an answer for you tomorrow. James nodded. That's fair. But there's one more thing you should know. He gestured to the tunnel. This entrance, behind the cabin wall, your father concealed it deliberately. That means he didn't trust people to know about this find. You should consider doing the same, at least until you've made your plans. You're suggesting we lie to people? Emma asked. I'm suggesting you don't advertise what you found until you're ready to protect it. Word travels fast in mining country. By tomorrow night, half of Timber Ridge could be up here with picks and shovels, claiming they have a right to stake adjacent land. It was a sobering thought. Sarah had seen what gold fever did to men, how it turned neighbors into enemies and reasonable people into claim jumpers. If word got out about this find, their lives would change overnight. They made their way back through the tunnel, James going last with the lantern. In the cabin, he carefully replaced the rotted boards over the opening, making it look as natural as possible. Then they went outside, where the horses grazed patiently in the afternoon sun. Before they mounted up, Emma stopped. Wait, I want to look at something. She went back into the cabin and climbed the ladder to the small loft space. Sarah heard her moving around above, boards creaking. A moment later, Emma called down, Sarah, come look at this. Sarah climbed up. The loft was low-ceilinged and cramped, filled with cobwebs and mouse nests. Emma knelt in the corner, holding something that caught the light filtering through cracks in the roof. A gold pan, old and dented, but unmistakable. Their father's prospecting pan, the one he'd used for years before turning to hard rock mining. He left it here, Emma said softly. All this time, Sarah took the pan, feeling its weight. The metal was worn smooth in places where her father's hands had gripped it, thousands of times. She could almost see him, standing in the creek below, panning gravel and hoping for color. Before he'd started the tunnel, before he'd found the vein, this pan had been his tool and his hope. We should keep it, Sarah said. Emma nodded. They climbed down, and Sarah showed the pan to James. Something flickered in his eyes when he saw it. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. Your father was thorough, he said. He would have panned every inch of that creek, followed any trace of gold back to its source. That's how he would have known where to start digging. They rode down the mountain as the sun touched the western peak. The trail seemed longer on the descent, and Sarah's mind was too full to focus on the beauty around them. Gold, real gold, running through the rock beneath their cabin. Enough to change everything if they handled it right. Enough to destroy them if they did. James rode beside them for most of the journey, but he seemed to sense they needed quiet to think. He didn't push for an answer, didn't try to convince them further. He simply rode, watchful and present. As they neared town, he spoke. Whatever you decide, I want you to know something. I'm not trying to cheat you or take advantage. My father spent his life studying geology, and I've spent mine honoring his work. If we partner on this, I'll treat you fairly. Why should we trust you? Sarah asked. We barely know you. You shouldn't trust me. Not yet. Trust is earned, not given. He met her eyes. But I hope to earn yours in time. They parted ways at the livery stable. James headed to the hotel, and the sisters walked back to the boarding house. As twilight settled over Timber Ridge, neither spoke until they were in their room with the door closed. Emma sat on the bed, still holding their father's old prospecting pan. "What are we going to do, Sarah?" "I don't know yet. Do you trust him?" "James?" Sarah moved to the window, watching the street below. Lamps were being lit in windows, smoke rising from chimneys. A normal evening in a normal town, except nothing felt normal anymore. Everything had changed in the space of a single day. "I think he's telling the truth about his father," Sarah said. "I think he's been searching for this gold for years, and he genuinely believes he can help us extract it safely. But I also think he wants it badly, maybe badly enough to bend the truth when it suits him. So we don't trust him. We don't trust anyone. Not completely." Sarah turned from the window. "But Emma, we need help. We can't do this alone. We don't have the knowledge or the money. We could sell the claim, take whatever someone will pay, and walk away, and live the rest of our lives wondering what we gave up, wondering what Papa died for." Sarah shook her head. "No. If we're going to do this, we do it right. We work the claim, extract the gold, and use it to build the life Mama and Papa never got to have." Emma set the pan aside and stood. "Then we partner with James. Maybe, but on our terms, with our conditions. If he wants this gold as badly as I think he does, he'll agree to whatever keeps us protected." That night, Sarah lay awake again, but this time her thoughts were different. She wasn't spinning in circles of worry and doubt. She was planning. If they were going to work with James Cordell, they needed legal protection. Contracts, properly drawn up, clear terms about ownership and profit sharing, written agreements that couldn't be disputed or reinterpreted late. In the morning, Sarah found Emma already awake, braiding her hair by the window. "I've been thinking," Emma said, "about what you said last night, about doing this on our terms, and we should talk to Mr. Patterson. Have him draw up a proper contract before we agree to anything with James." Sarah smiled. Her younger sister wasn't as naive as people assumed. "Exactly what I was thinking." They went to Patterson's office after breakfast. The lawyer listened carefully as Sarah explained what they'd found and what James had proposed. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with interest. "Gold," he said, when she finished. "Well, that changes things considerably." "We need a contract," Sarah said. "Something that protects us legally, spells out exactly what each party contributes and receives." Patterson pulled out paper and pen. "Let's start with the basics. The land is yours, free and clear. That's established by the deed. Any gold extracted from that land belongs to you by right. If Mr. Cordell is providing equipment and expertise, he's essentially acting as a contract. You're hiring him to work your claim." He proposed a partnership, Emma said. 60% to us, 40 to him. That's generous of him, but we need to define what happens in various scenarios. What if the gold runs out after a month? What if it continues for years? What if there are disputes about expenses or distribution? What if one party wants to end the arrangement? They spent 2 hours working through details. Patterson was thorough, asking questions Sarah hadn't considered. By the time they finished, they had a framework for a contract that protected the sisters' interests, while giving James fair compensation for his work. "I'll draft the formal document today," Patterson said. "Have it ready by this evening. You can review it with Mr. Cordell tomorrow." "What will this cost?" Sarah asked. She had very little money left. Patterson waved a hand. "Consider it an investment. If there's gold on that mountain, Timber Ridge will benefit. New people, new businesses. A percentage of the claim revenue will go to the territorial government, which means better roads, maybe even a proper school. Your success helps everyone." They found James at the hotel, sitting in the small dining room with coffee and a newspaper. He stood when they entered, his face carefully neutral. "Miss Hayes, Miss Emma, have you made a decision?" "We're interested in a partnership," Sarah said. "But we have conditions." "I'd expect nothing less. Please, sit." They sat, and Sarah laid out their terms. A formal contract, drawn up by Patterson, clear accounting of all expenses and revenues. The sisters would maintain final say over all major decisions regarding the claim. James would be compensated for his expertise and equipment, but the land and anything extracted from it would remain legally owned by the Hayes sisters. James listened without interrupting. When Sarah finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "Those are fair terms. More than fair. I agree to all of it." "Just like that?" Emma asked. "You don't want to negotiate?" "Miss Emma, your sister has outlined an arrangement that protects you while compensating me reasonably for my contribution. I'd be a fool to object." He looked at Sarah. "You're a shrewd businesswoman. Your father would be proud." Something in Sarah's chest loosened slightly. Not trust, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of respect. "Mr. Patterson is drafting the contract. We can review it tomorrow and sign if everything is in order." "Excellent. In the meantime, I should start making arrangements. We'll need equipment brought up from Denver, timbers for shoring up the tunnel, proper mining tools, a crew of workers who can be trusted to keep quiet about what we've found." "How long before we can start actual extraction?" Emma asked. 2 weeks, perhaps 3. "We need to do this properly. Shore up the existing tunnel, extend it safely, assess the full extent of the vein. Rush this, and someone gets hurt or killed." Sarah appreciated that James understood the danger. Too many prospectors rushed into mines without proper support, driven by greed and impatience. Cave-ins killed more miners than any other hazard. Her father's death was proof of that. "We'll need to move up to the cabin," Sarah said, "to oversee the work." "The cabin's not fit to live in," James said. "Not in its current state." "Then we make it fit. Patch the roof, repair the walls, make it weatherproof. If we're going to work this claim, we need to be on site." James considered this. "I can hire carpenters from town. Have the cabin made livable within a week." "No." Sarah's voice was firm. "No one else can know about the gold. That means no workers from town. Not yet. We'll do the repairs ourselves." "The 3 of us?" Emma looked uncertain. "Sarah, we don't know how to repair a roof." "Then we'll learn." "James, you said you had carpentry skills." "Some, yes. But Miss Hayes, repairing that cabin properly will take weeks of hard work." "Then we start today." There was a long pause. James studied Sarah's face, and she met his gaze steadily. She needed to know if he was truly committed to this partnership, if he was willing to work alongside them rather than just directing from a distance. Finally, James smiled. "Today it is. I'll purchase supplies and tools. We can load everything on a mule and head up the mountain this afternoon." They spent the morning gathering what they'd need: lumber, nails, tar paper for the roof, a saw, hammers, a level. Sarah used the last of her savings and borrowed against her future earnings, signing a note with the general store. Miss Hettering raised an eyebrow at the quantity of building supplies, but asked no questions. "Fixing up the old place," was all she said. "Making it livable," Sarah confirmed. By early afternoon, they were riding back up the mountain trail, a pack mule loaded with supplies trailing behind them. The climb seemed easier this time, perhaps because Sarah knew what waited at the end. Not just a ruin, but possibility. At the cabin, they unloaded the supplies, and James surveyed the structure with a critical eye. "The roof is the priority. If we don't get that sealed before the next rain, water damage will only get worse." They worked until sunset, with James on the roof replacing rotten shingles, while Sarah and Emma cleared debris from inside the cabin. The work was hard and unfamiliar, but there was something satisfying about it. Each board replaced, each nail driven, was progress towards something that belonged to them. As the light faded, they built a fire outside and shared a simple meal of bread and dried meat. The mountain air was cool, carrying the scent of pine. Stars emerged overhead, more than Sarah had ever seen in town, where lamplight dulled their brilliance. "My father used to camp up here sometimes," James said, gazing at the stars. When he was doing his surveys, he'd tell me about nights like this, how quiet the mountains were, how you could hear the earth breathing if you listened close enough. Did he ever talk about this specific area? Sarah asked, about what he thought was here. He believed there was a primary vein somewhere in these mountains. The placer gold that had been found in the creeks, he said, that was just runoff. Small flakes that had weathered away from the main deposit over thousands of years. He thought if someone could trace it back to the source, they'd find something substantial, and you've been searching based on his notes. His notes and my own observations. I've studied geology, learned to read rock formations the way he did. When I saw the survey maps of this area, I knew this was the most likely location. Emma wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. It's strange, isn't it? Your father and ours both looking for the same thing, both dying before they could finish what they started. Maybe that's why we're here now, James said quietly, to finish what they began. Sarah looked at him across the fire. In the flickering light, his face was thoughtful, almost sad. She realized she'd been thinking of him as an adversary, someone to be guarded against. But perhaps he was more like them than she'd recognized. Someone carrying the weight of a parent's dreams, trying to honor a legacy. The next 3 days passed in a blur of physical labor. Sarah's hands developed blisters that broke and hardened into calluses. Her shoulders ached from hammering and lifting, but the cabin slowly transformed. The roof was sealed and no longer leaked. The broken windows were covered with oiled paper that let in light while keeping out wind. The collapsed porch was rebuilt, solid enough to hold their weight. Emma proved surprisingly capable with a hammer and saw. She worked alongside James on the walls, replacing rotted logs and chinching gaps with mud and moss. Sarah caught them laughing together over some shared joke, saw the way James's hand lingered on Emma's when he helped her lift a heavy beam. She should have felt protective, worried about her sister's heart, but watching them work together, she saw something genuine developing, not the reckless passion of youth, but something steadier, a partnership built on shared purpose and growing respect. On the 4th day, James rode down to town to sign the contract Patterson had prepared. He returned with the document, officially notarized and binding. Sarah read through every line before adding her signature. Emma signed as well, her hand careful and deliberate. It's done, James. We're partners. Now comes the hard part, Sarah replied. They began work on the tunnel that same afternoon. James brought in timber from the surrounding forest, cutting and shaping support beams. They worked carefully, methodically, shoring up the existing tunnel before attempting to extend it. Every few feet they installed crossbeams and uprights, creating a framework that would prevent collapse. The work was slow and dangerous. They could only operate during daylight hours when they could see properly. Even with lanterns, the deeper sections of the tunnel were treacherous. Loose rock, unstable walls, the constant threat of cave-in. One afternoon, while Sarah was working in the tunnel with James, a section of wall gave way without warning. Rock and dirt cascaded down, and James yanked Sarah backward just as a large stone crashed where she'd been standing. They stood in the darkness, breathing hard, the lantern knocked aside and flickering. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. If James hadn't moved so quickly, that stone would have crushed her skull. Are you hurt? His hands were on her shoulders, his voice urgent. I'm fine, but she was shaking. We need to be more careful. Test every section before we work it. His hands were still on her shoulders, steadying her. In the dim light, his face was close to hers, concerned and genuinely frightened for her. Sarah pulled away, uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment. Let's get back to work. But that night, lying in the repaired cabin while Emma slept beside her, Sarah thought about James's hands on her shoulders, the fear in his voice. He cared about their safety. That much was clear. Whether he cared about them as people or simply as partners in his venture, She couldn't yet say. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Sarah heard horses on the trail and looked out to see Sheriff Brennan riding up with another man she didn't recognize. Her first thought was that word had gotten out about the gold, but Brennan's expression was friendly, not suspicious. "Miss Hayes," he called out as he dismounted, "wanted to check on you girls. Make sure you're settling in all right." "We're managing fine, Sheriff. Thank you." The other man was younger, maybe 25, with sandy hair and an easy smile. "This is my deputy, Frank Morrison," Brennan said. "Doc Morrison's son. I thought you should meet him, seeing as you'll be living up here." Frank tipped his hat. "Ma'am, if you ever need anything or run into trouble, I patrol this area regularly." James emerged from the cabin, and Sarah saw both men's expressions shift, becoming more guarded. They'd heard about the stranger working with the Hayes sisters. "Sheriff, deputy," James said evenly. "James Cordell." Brennan studied him. "You're the land investor from out of town." "That's right. And what exactly is your business with these ladies?" Sarah stepped forward before James could answer. "Mr. Cordell is helping us repair the cabin and make the property habitable. We've entered into a business arrangement." "What kind of business?" Frank asked, his tone friendly but curious. "The kind that's our own concern," Sarah said firmly. "We appreciate you checking on us, Sheriff, but as you can see, we're fine." Brennan nodded slowly, but his eyes moved from the repaired cabin to the supplies stacked nearby to James himself. Sarah could see him putting pieces together, trying to understand what was really happening here. "You planning to stay up here permanent, Brennan?" "For the foreseeable future, yes. It's isolated, rough country. If you need help, it's a 3-hour ride to town." "We're aware of that," Sarah said. "We can take care of ourselves." Frank dismounted and walked toward the cabin, looking at the repairs with an appraising eye. "Good work on the roof. Solid carpentry." "Thank you," James said. "You do this kind of work often?" "When necessary." The deputy's casual manner didn't fool Sarah. He was sizing up James, looking for reasons to distrust him. She couldn't entirely blame him. A stranger, showing and partnering with two vulnerable women, would raise questions in any small town. Emma came around from behind the cabin, carrying a bucket of water from the creek. She stopped when she saw the visitors, then set down the bucket and smoothed her dress. "Sheriff Brennan, what a nice surprise." Brennan's expression softened when he looked at Emma. "Just checking in, Miss Emma, making sure you're safe up here." "We're quite safe. Mr. Cordell has been a perfect gentleman." Frank's attention shifted to Emma, and Sarah saw interest flicker in his eyes. "Great, that was a complication they didn't need." "If there's nothing else, gentlemen," Sarah said, "we have work to do." Brennan took the hint. He remounted his horse, but before leaving, he fixed James with a steady look. "Miss Cordell, if these ladies come to any harm while in your company, you'll answer to me." "Understood." "Perfectly, Sheriff." After they rode away, Emma let out a breath. That was tense. "Brennan's just being protective," James said. "Can't fault him for that. He suspects something," Sarah said. "We need to be more careful. If he starts asking around town about what we're doing up here, people will get curious. Then we tell him the truth," Emma suggested. "Or part of it. That we're trying to make the cabin livable so we can sell the property for a better price." It was a reasonable cover story. Sarah nodded. "I'll ride down tomorrow, talk to Brennan, put his mind at ease." But that night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their secret was becoming harder to keep. The more time they spent at the cabin, the more attention they'd draw. And once mining operations began in earnest, there would be no hiding what they were doing. She was lying awake with these thoughts when she heard movement outside. She rose quietly, careful not to wake Emma, and peered through the window. James stood in the clearing, looking up at the stars. He'd been sleeping in the small lean-to they'd built against the cabin's side wall, giving the sisters privacy in the main room. Sarah pulled her shawl around her shoulders and went outside. The night air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and mountain stone. James turned when he heard her approach. "Couldn't sleep? Too much on my mind." "Same here." He gestured to a log near the dying fire. "Join me." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The mountain was quiet, except for the occasional hoot of an owl and the distant rustle of some animal moving through the underbrush. "I've been thinking about what the sheriff said," James finally spoke. "About you being isolated up here. He's not wrong. If something happened, if one of you got hurt or sick, it would take hours to get help. Are you suggesting we abandon the claim? No, but maybe we should consider bringing in help. People we can trust." "Like who?" Everyone in Timber Ridge talked. "Within a week the whole territory would know we found gold." "Not everyone talks. There are men who understand the value of discretion, former soldiers, experienced miners who've seen enough gold rushes to know how ugly they can get, men who'd work for good wages and keep their mouths shut." Sarah considered this. It would mean sharing more of the profits. It would mean staying alive long enough to see any profits. The logic was sound, though Sarah hated admitting it. How many men? 2, maybe 3. Enough to work the claim properly and provide security. We'd pay them wages, not a share of the gold. "And you know men like this?" James nodded. "I know a few. Veterans who've done mining work before. Men who understand orders and the importance of keeping silent." Sarah pulled her shawl tighter. "Let me think about it." They sat in silence again. After a while, James spoke more quietly. "I want you to know something, Sarah. I didn't come here to take advantage of you and your sister. I know how it looks, a stranger appearing right when you inherit this land. But my intentions are honest." Sarah turned to face him. "You knew there was gold here before you ever met us. You came looking for it specifically." "Yes, but I also knew the land belonged to someone, and that person had rights. I could have tried to steal the information, file claims on adjacent property, squeeze you out legally. Some men would have, but that's not who I am." "Then who are you, James Cordell?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the embers of the fire. A man trying to finish what his father started, trying to prove that all those years of study and surveying meant something. "My father died, believing he'd failed, that he'd wasted his life chasing rocks and theories. I want to show that he was right, that his work mattered." Sarah heard the pain in his voice, the weight of expectation he carried. "My father died the same way, believing he'd failed us." "But he didn't fail. He found it, Sarah. He found exactly what he was looking for. And then he died before he could do anything with it. So we do it for them. We extract that gold. We make it count for something. We turn their dreams into reality." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. In the dim firelight, she could see the sincerity in his face. He wasn't just after wealth. He was after vindication, legacy, proof that his father's life hadn't been wasted. She understood that drive because she felt it herself. "All right," she said. "We hire help, but they sign contracts, legal agreements that bind them to silence. And at the first sign that anyone is talking, we shut down operations." "Agreed." Sarah stood. "I should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be another long day." "Sarah," James stood as well, "thank you for trusting me, even a little. Don't make me regret it." She went back inside, but sleep didn't come easily. Her mind kept circling back to James, to the complexity of what they were building together. Partnership was one thing, trust was another, and underneath it all was Emma, growing closer to him each day. The next morning, Sarah rode down to town alone. She found Sheriff Brennan at his office, drinking coffee and reviewing paperwork. "Miss Hayes," he said when she entered, "didn't expect to see you so soon. I wanted to clarify things about Mr. Cordell. I know his presence at our property raises questions." Brennan gestured to a chair. "I'm listening." Sarah had prepared her story carefully. "My sister and I inherited worthless land. Mr. Cordell offered to help us repair the cabin so we could sell the property for a decent price. In exchange, he gets a small percentage of the sale. It's a business arrangement, nothing more." "And you trust him?" "I trust the contract we signed with Mr. Patterson. Everything is legal and documented." Brennan studied her face. "You know I have to ask. Is he bothering you or your sister? Taking advantage in any way? No. He's been nothing but professional and helpful. The sheriff nodded slowly. All right. But Sarah, if that changes, if you need help, you send word. Frank or I can be up that mountain in a few hours. I appreciate that, Sheriff. As she was leaving, Brennan spoke again. One more thing. There's been talk in town. People wondering why a stranger would invest time and money in a worthless piece of property. Wondering what he really knows that others don't. Sarah kept her expression neutral. People always talk. Doesn't mean there's truth to it. Maybe not. But you be careful anyway. Gold fever makes men do terrible things. And if word gets out that there might be something valuable on that mountain, you'll have more than just Frank checking up on you. Sarah returned to the mountain with supplies and a growing sense of urgency. Time was running out. Every day they worked the claim without discovery was a gift. But gifts didn't last forever. When she arrived at the cabin, she found Emma and James working inside the tunnel. They'd extended it another 6 feet, shoring up each new section with careful precision. The lantern light flickered off the rock walls, and Sarah could see the glittering vein more clearly now. It was wider than it had first appeared, perhaps 5 inches across in places. How much deeper does it go? Sarah asked. James looked up from where he was examining the vein with a small chisel. Hard to say. Could be 20 feet, could be 200. We won't know until we follow it. Sheriff Brennan knows people are talking. We're running out of time to keep this secret. Emma set down her tools. Then what do? We work faster. And we bring in help, like James suggested. Over the next week, James rode to Denver and returned with 2 men. The first was called Dutch, a thick-shouldered man in his 40s with gray threading his beard. He'd served in the army and spent 15 years mining in California and Denver. He spoke little, observed much, and when he examined the tunnel, his eyes lit with professional appreciation. Good vein, was all he said. Real good vein. The second man was younger, maybe 30, with dark skin and intelligent eyes. His name was Samuel, and he'd been born into slavery in Missouri before the war. He'd worked as a free man in the Colorado mines for 10 years, learning the craft from the ground up. He knew explosives, ore processing, and how to shore up a tunnel so it wouldn't collapse. James had chosen well. Both men signed contracts with Patterson, agreeing to wages of $2 per day plus room and board. They would work the claim for as long as extraction continued, and they would speak to no one about what they found. You break that contract, Sarah told them both, and you'll answer to the law. Mr. Patterson will pursue damages, and you'll never work a legitimate claim again. Dutch nodded. Understood, Mum. We know how to keep our mouths shut. I've seen what loose talk does to a mine, Samuel added. Brings in claim jumpers, thieves, men willing to kill for gold. I want no part of that. With 2 experienced miners on site, the work accelerated. They dug carefully but efficiently, extending the tunnel deeper into the mountain while maintaining proper support. The vein continued, sometimes widening, sometimes narrowing, but always present. They began extracting ore, carefully breaking away rock that contained gold and hauling it out in buckets. At night, by lantern light, they would crush the ore and separate the gold using basic amalgamation techniques. It was slow row, but within 2 weeks, they had accumulated nearly 3 pounds of raw gold. 3 pounds. Sarah held one of the rough nuggets in her palm, feeling its surprising weight. At current prices, this single piece was worth more than she'd earned in her entire life. This is just the beginning, James said. Once we go deeper, once we properly process the ore, we could be pulling out 20–30 pounds a month. The numbers were staggering, life-changing, dangerous. Emma had become close with Samuel's wife Ruth, who'd come up to help with cooking and maintaining the camp. Ruth was a quiet woman, with capable hands and a warm smile. She asked no questions about what the men were digging for, but Sarah suspected she understood perfectly. One evening, while the men were still working in the tunnel, Ruth and Emma prepared dinner over the fire. Sarah sat nearby, mending a torn shirt. "My Samuel says the vein runs deep," Ruth said, conversationally. "Says it's one of the best he's seen." Sarah looked up. "He told you? He's my husband. He tells me everything." Ruth stirred the pot of stew. "But I'm good at keeping secrets. Had to be during the war. Some secrets kept people alive. This secret could get people killed," Sarah said. "All the more reason to guard it careful." Ruth looked at her directly. "You're worried about your sister and Mr. Cordell." It wasn't a question. Sarah set down her mending. "Should I be?" Ruth smiled gently. "I watch people, Miss Sarah. It's a habit from hard years. And what I see is a good man who looks at your sister like she's sunshine after rain, and I see her looking back the same way. They barely know each other. Sometimes knowing takes time. Sometimes it happens quick, like lightning." Ruth added salt to the stew. "My Samuel and I knew each other 3 weeks before we married. That was 20 years ago. Still feels like yesterday." Sarah watched Emma laugh at something James said as they emerged from the tunnel, dusty and tired. Her sister's face was bright with happiness. Sarah hadn't seen in years, maybe ever. "I just don't want her hurt," Sarah said quietly. "Can't protect people from hurt. It finds us all eventually, but you can let them choose their own path, even if it scares you." That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about Ruth's words. Emma was 28 years old enough to make her own choices, but Sarah had spent so many years protecting her younger sister, shielding her from the hardships of their life, that letting go felt impossible. The next morning brought the discovery that changed everything. Samuel and Dutch had been working a section deep in the tunnel, following the vein as it curved downward. Sarah was outside splitting firewood when she heard Samuel's shout echo from inside the mountain. Everyone dropped what they were doing and ran to the tunnel entrance. James went in first with a lantern, Sarah and Emma close behind. They found Samuel and Dutch standing in the enlarged chamber, staring at the back wall. The vein had widened dramatically. What had been 5 inches across was now nearly 2 feet. A massive band of gold-bearing quartz that ran from floor to ceiling. In the lantern light it gleamed like captured starlight. "Sweet mercy," Dutch breathed. "I've never seen anything like this." James moved closer, examining the formation with trembling hands. He scraped at the rock, and pure gold dust fell away. Not flecks or traces, solid gold, running through the quartz in thick ribbons. "This is it," he said, his voice shaking. "This is the primary deposit my father theorized about, the source of all the placer gold that's been found in these mountains." Sarah couldn't speak. The wealth represented in this single wall was beyond calculation. Enough to buy half of Wyoming. Enough to change not just their lives, but the lives of their children and grandchildren. Enough to be dangerous beyond measure. "We need to seal this tunnel," Sarah said. "Right now. No one else can see this." "Agreed," James said. "We tell no one. Not even Patterson. Not until we've extracted what we can and secured it safely." They spent the rest of the day disguising the tunnel entrance. They built a false wall inside the cabin, making it look like solid logs instead of a passage. They scattered debris and dirt to make it appear undisturbed. To any casual observer, the cabin was just a repaired structure with nothing special inside. But that night, as they sat around the fire, the weight of what they'd found pressed down on all of them. Dutch was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. "Word will get out eventually," he said. "Always does. And when it does, this mountain will be crawling with every prospector, claim jumper, and outlaw in the territory. Then we work fast," James said. "Extract as much as we can before that happens." "How much time do you think we have?" Emma asked. Samuel shook his head. "Hard to say. Could be weeks, could be months. But someone will notice the gold when you try to sell it. Assayers talk, bankers talk, and £3 is enough to start rumors. When you bring in 30, 40 pounds, people will know." Sarah had been thinking about this. We need to spread it out, sell small amounts in different places. Denver, Cheyenne, maybe even San Francisco. Keep each transaction small enough not to draw attention. That'll take time, James said. And multiple trips. Better than advertising what we found, Sarah replied. They sat in silence, each contemplating the magnitude of their discovery and the danger it represented. Finally, Ruth spoke from where she sat beside Samuel. There's another consideration. The territorial governor will want his share. Mining claims are taxed, and a fine this big will attract official attention. We'll pay what's owed, Sarah said, when the time comes. But first we secure enough to protect ourselves. How much is enough? Emma asked. It was James who answered. Enough to hire lawyers if we need them. Enough to buy proper equipment and security. Enough that we're not vulnerable. He looked around the circle. I'd say 100 pounds. At least. 100 pounds of gold. Sarah did the math quickly in her head. Nearly $30,000. An impossible sum that was suddenly very possible. We'll need to work around the clock, Dutch said. Shifts. So someone's always extracting ore. We can process it in batches. And we'll need a secure place to store it, Samuel added. Can't keep that much gold sitting in a cabin. They debated options late into the night. Finally, they decided to bury the processed gold in sealed containers at various locations around the property. They'd mark the locations with innocent-looking rocks, nothing that would draw attention but enough that they could find the cash when needed. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked with focused intensity. Dutch and Samuel took shifts in the tunnel, carefully extracting ore from the massive vein. James and Sarah processed it, crushing the rock and separating the gold. Emma and Ruth handled supplies, cooking, and keeping watch for any unexpected visitors. The pile of gold grew, 10 pounds, then 20, then 30. Each nugget and ounce represented freedom, security, the vindication of their father's dreams, but also danger, because Sarah knew that wealth this great attracted predators. It was during the 3rd week that Emma found the compass. She'd been cleaning in the cabin, sweeping out accumulated dirt and debris from the corners. Beneath a loose floorboard near the false wall, she discovered an old metal box. Inside was a compass, tarnished and broken, its glass face cracked. But when Emma opened the compass, the needle didn't point north. It spun erratically for a moment, then settled, pointing directly toward the back wall, toward the hidden tunnel. Sarah, look at this. Sarah examined the compass, turning it in different directions. No matter which way she turned, the needle swung back to point at the tunnel entrance. James came to look. His eyes widened. It's reacting to the mineral deposits. Certain types of ore can affect magnetic fields. That vein must be massive enough to pull the needle. Papa left this here, Emma said quietly. He wanted us to find it. He knew if anything happened to him, this would point the way. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Her father had left them a gift, a final message that said he'd found what he was looking for, that his life's work hadn't been wasted. The compass was proof that he'd died knowing he'd succeeded. We should keep this, Emma said. As a reminder, Sarah nodded, unable to speak. She closed the compass carefully and slipped it into her pocket. That afternoon, Deputy Frank Morrison rode up the trail. Sarah saw him coming and quickly signaled to the others. Dutch and Samuel retreated into the cabin, while James positioned himself casually on the porch, as if he'd just been resting. Frank dismounted, his manner friendly, but his eyes observant. Afternoon, folks. Just making my rounds. Deputy, Sarah said, what brings you up here? Sheriff wanted me to check on things, make sure you're not having any trouble. His gaze swept the camp, taking in the repaired cabin, the supplies, the evidence of ongoing work. Looks like you've been busy, making improvements, Sarah said. The cabin's almost comfortable now. Mind if I take a look inside? Sarah's heart hammered, but she kept her expression calm. Of course, She led him into the cabin. Dutch and Samuel had hidden the mining tools and covered the false wall with hanging blankets and stored supplies. To a casual glance, it looked like a simple living space. Frank walked around, examining things with professional interest. "You've done good work here," he said. "Place looks solid." "Thank you." He moved toward the back wall, and Sarah held her breath, but he only glanced at the blankets before turning away. "Your sister around?" "Down at the creek, fetching water. I was hoping to speak with her. Haven't seen her in town for a while." Sarah recognized the tone in Frank's voice, the way his face brightened when he mentioned Emma. He was interested in her sister, and in different circumstances, Sarah might have encouraged it. Frank was steady, respectable, the kind of man who could provide security, but these weren't different circumstances. "I'll let her know you stopped by," Sarah said. Frank lingered at the door, clearly hoping Emma would appear. When she didn't, he finally tipped his hat. "Well, you folks take care, and Miss Hayes, if you need anything at all, you send word." After he left, James emerged from where he'd been standing guard outside. "That was close, too close. He's suspicious. Or he's interested in Emma," James said quietly. Sarah looked at him sharply, hearing something in his voice. Not quite jealousy, but something close to it. "Would that bother you?" James met her eyes. "Your sister is free to choose whoever she wants, but yes, it would bother me, because I care about her, Sarah. More than I probably should, given how short a time we've known each other. She cares about you too. I'd have to be blind not to see it. And you don't approve." "I didn't say that." Sarah leaned against the porch rail. "I'm protective of her. Always have been. But Ruth told me something that's been sitting with me. She said I can't protect Emma from hurt, and I can't choose her path for her. Ruth, a wise woman. She is." Sarah turned to face him fully. "So I'm saying this once, James Cordell. If you hurt my sister, if you break her heart or take advantage of her trust, I will make you regret it. Partnership or no partnership, contract or no contract. Are we clear?" James smiled, but there was respect in his eyes. "Crystal clear. And for what it's worth, I have no intention of hurting her. My intentions are honorable. See that they stay that way." Emma returned from the creek, and her face lit up when she saw James. Sarah watched them exchange glances, saw the unspoken communication between them. They'd moved beyond friendship into something deeper, whether Sarah approved or not. That evening, as they processed the day's ore extraction, James made an announcement. "We've pulled 47 pounds so far. At this rate, we'll hit our 100-pound target within 3 more weeks." "And then what?" Dutch asked. "We can't just walk into a bank with 100 pounds of gold." "No," James agreed, "but we can transport it safely to Denver. There are private assayers there who handle large quantities discreetly. We sell in batches, deposit the money in different banks under different names, keep everything spread out and untraceable." "That's a lot of moving parts," Samuel said. "A lot of places where something could go wrong." "It is, which is why we need a solid plan." James looked around the group. "I propose we continue extraction for 3 more weeks. Then we seal the tunnel completely, make it look like we found nothing. Sarah and I will transport the gold to Denver while the rest of you stay here and maintain the appearance of normal activity." "Why you and Sarah?" Emma asked. "Because we're the legal owners of record. If something goes wrong, if we're stopped or questioned, we have documentation that this gold came from our legal claim. The rest of you are employees. Better keep you out of it." Sarah understood his logic, but she didn't like the idea of leaving Emma behind. "Emma should come with us. 3 people traveling with that much gold will draw more attention than 2, James said. "And Emma needs to be here to maintain the property rights. If something happens to us, she'll need to protect the claim." It made sense, even if Sarah didn't like it. They spent the next hour working out details. Routes, timing, cover stories. They'd pose as a married couple traveling on business. less suspicious than a single man and woman together. The idea of pretending to be James's wife made Sarah uncomfortable, but she pushed the feeling aside. This was business, survival, protecting what they'd worked for. Over the next 3 weeks, they worked with grinding determination. The tunnel extended deeper, following the vein as it curved through the mountain. The gold kept coming, more than they dared hope. 60 pounds, then 70, then 80. With each passing day, Sarah felt the pressure build. They were sitting on a powder keg, and every day increased the chance that someone would strike the match. People in town were asking questions. Mrs. Kettering mentioned that several strangers had been through, asking about mining claims in the area. Sheriff Brennan stopped by twice more, his visits friendly but probing, and then there was the matter of Frank Morrison. He rode up every few days, always with some excuse, checking on their safety, bringing supplies, delivering messages that didn't exist, but everyone knew he was coming to see Emma. Sarah watched her sister handle Frank's attention with grace and kindness, never encouraging him, but never being cruel either. It was James that Emma's eyes sought out, James who made her smile in that particular way. One evening, when they'd just finished burying another cache of gold, James pulled Emma aside. Sarah watched from a distance as they walked toward the creek, heads close together in conversation. When they returned, Emma was wearing a small smile, and James looked nervous, but happy. Later in the cabin, Emma showed Sarah a simple gold ring. He made it himself, from the first nugget we extracted. Emma, I know what you're going to say, that it's too fast, that we barely know each other, that I should be careful. Actually, I was going to say congratulations. Sarah pulled her sister into an embrace. He's a good man, and you deserve happiness. Emma hugged her tight. Thank you. We're not planning anything until after this is over, until we've secured the gold and can think clearly. But Sarah, I love him. I know it seems sudden, but I love him. I know you do. Sarah pulled back, looking at her sister's radiant face. Papa would have liked him. Mama too. I think so. I hope so. The next day they reached 98 pounds, close enough to their goal that they could taste it. But that afternoon brought trouble in the form of 3 riders who appeared on the trail. Sarah saw them coming and immediately called out a warning. Everyone dropped what they were doing and moved into defensive positions. James had his rifle, Dutch had his pistol, and Sarah had the revolver Sheriff Brennan had given her. The riders stopped at the edge of the clearing. They were rough-looking men, unshaven and hard-eyed. The leader was a lean man, with a scar running down his left cheek. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace. Easy now, he called out. We're not looking for trouble. Then state your business and move on, James said, his rifle steady. Name's Pike. We're prospectors, working claims over on the western slope. Heard there might be some good ground over this way. This property is privately owned and legally claimed, Sarah said. You're trespassing. Pike's eyes moved over the camp, taking in the repaired cabin, the supplies, the evidence of activity. Looks like you've been doing some work here. Find anything interesting? Nothing but rocks and hard labor, James said. Now I'll ask you once more to leave. Pike smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sure, we'll be on our way. Just thought we'd introduce ourselves, seeing as we're neighbors and all. He tipped his hat mockingly. You folks have a good day now. They rode off, but Sarah's stomach was tight with worry. Pike had been assessing them, evaluating their defenses, looking for weaknesses. He'd be back, and next time it wouldn't be a friendly visit. We need to accelerate the timeline, James said once the riders were out of sight. Pike's the kind who smells gold like a wolf smells blood. We're 2 pounds short of our target, Dutch pointed out. Close enough. We seal the tunnel tonight and leave for Denver tomorrow. They worked through the night, extracting the last of the easily accessible ore and processing it quickly. By dawn they had just over 100 pounds of gold, divided into small, portable containers. They sealed the tunnel entrance, built the false wall even more convincingly, and scattered debris to make it look like they'd given up on finding anything valuable. To any observer, the cabin would appear to be nothing more than a fixed-up homestead. Sarah packed light for the journey. Practical clothes, minimal supplies, and the gold divided into saddlebags that could be defended if necessary. James prepared as well, checking his weapons and ensuring their papers were in order. Emma helped Sarah prepare, her hands steady but her eyes worried. "I don't like the idea of you going without more protection. We'll be fine. James knows the route, and we'll be traveling fast. 2 people attract less attention than a group. Still, those men, Pike and his friends, they look dangerous. They are dangerous, which is exactly why we need to get this gold somewhere safe." Sarah gripped her sister's hands. "You'll be protected here. Dutch and Samuel know what they're doing, and they're both armed. Anyone tries to cause trouble, they can handle it. It's not me I'm worried about." Sarah pulled Emma into a hug. "I'll be back in 2 weeks. 3 at most. And when I return, we'll have money in the bank and legal documentation of our claim. We'll be secure, Emma. Finally secure." They left at first light, riding down the mountain trail as the sun painted the peaks in shades of rose and gold. The saddlebags were heavy with their fortune, carefully distributed between both horses. James had his rifle across his lap, and Sarah kept her revolver within easy reach. The journey to Denver would take 5 days if they pushed hard. James had mapped out a route that avoided the main roads where possible, traveling through backcountry, where they'd be less likely to encounter trouble. The first 2 days passed without incident. They camped rough, taking turns keeping watch through the night. Sarah found herself grateful for James's presence, his steady competence and watchful nature. He'd grown from the stranger who'd appeared in Timber Ridge into someone she trusted with her life. On the 3rd day, they stopped in a small settlement to rest the horses and replenish supplies. It was barely more than a crossroads, a general store, and a saloon and a handful of houses. While James saw to the horses, Sarah went into the store. The owner was an older woman with sharp eyes and a suspicious manner. She watched Sarah browse the shelves, clearly assessing whether she had money to spend. "You traveling far?" the woman asked. "Denver. My husband and I have business there." "Husband, is it? You two don't wear rings?" Sarah had forgotten that detail. She improvised. "Lost mine crossing a creek. Current took it right off my finger." The woman didn't look entirely convinced, but she let it pass. Sarah purchased jerky, hardtack, and coffee, paying with coins from the small amount of gold they'd converted before leaving. As she was leaving, the woman spoke again. "You be careful on the road. There's been reports of robberies between here and Denver. Groups of men targeting travelers. We'll be careful. Thank you." Outside, Sarah found James watering the horses at a trough. She told him what the store owner had said. "We'll avoid the main road completely," James said. "Take the mountain route. It's longer and rougher, but safer." They rode out within the hour, turning onto a narrow trail that climbed into the hills. The path was steep and treacherous in places, but James navigated it with confidence. He'd traveled this country before, knew its hidden way. That night, they made camp in a small canyon, building their fire in a depression where the light wouldn't be visible from a distance. They ate quickly and settled into rest. Sarah took the first watch, sitting with her back against a rock and the revolver in her lap. The night was quiet except for the occasional call of an owl and the rustle of small animals in the brush. Above, stars filled the sky in brilliant profusion. She thought about Emma back at the cabin, about the gold they were carrying, about how much their lives had changed in just a few months, from poverty and desperation to wealth and possibility. But the transformation came with its own dangers. "You should sleep," James said, appearing beside her. "I'll take over. I'm not tired. Sarah, you've barely slept in 3 days." Rest. I'll wake you if there's any trouble." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at her. She moved to her bedroll and lay down, the revolver beside her. Within minutes, she was asleep. She woke to James's hand on her shoulder and his urgent whisper, "Sarah, we have company." She was instantly alert, reaching for her revolver. The fire had burned down to embers. In the dim light, she could see James crouched low, his rifle ready. He pointed to the canyon rim. Against the stars, Sarah could make out shapes. 3 riders silhouetted on the ridge above them. They weren't moving, just watching, waiting. "Pike," Sarah breathed. "Most likely. He must have followed us from the mountain. What do we do?" James's jaw tightened. "We can't outrun them, not in the dark on this terrain. And they have the high ground. If we try to leave, they'll pick us off. So we're trapped. Not trapped, just limited in our options." James moved to their saddlebags, checking the loads on his rifle and pistol. "How many shots do you have?" Sarah checked her revolver. 6, plus the extra rounds in my pocket. Maybe 20 total. I have about 30 for the rifle, 15 for the pistol." He looked at her steadily. "Sarah, I need to know you can do this if it comes to shooting. I can do what needs doing." The riders on the ridge began to move, picking their way down into the canyon. 3 of them, just as before. Pike in the lead, recognizable by his lean build and the way he sat his horse. They stopped about 50 yards away, just beyond effective pistol range, but well within rifle shot. Pike called out, his voice carrying easily in the quiet night. "Mr. Cordell, Miss Hayes, we seem to keep running into each other." "You're following us," James called back. "That's not coincidence." "No, it's not. See, I got to thinking after we visited your place. You two have been working awful hard on that mountain, spending a lot of money on supplies. Now you're traveling to Denver with heavy saddlebags, taking back routes to avoid attention. A man might wonder what you're carrying. Wondering isn't the same as having a right to know." Pike laughed. "True enough, but here's the thing. We're 3 armed men, and you're 2 people in a canyon with nowhere to go. So I'm going to make you a proposition. You give us half of whatever you're carrying, and we let you ride on. You get to keep half your gold and your lives. Seems fair to me. And if we refuse," Sarah called out, "then we take it all, and you don't ride anywhere." Sarah felt her heart hammering but kept her voice steady. "You kill us and you'll hang. Sheriff Brennan knows where we went. He'll come looking. By the time anyone finds you, we'll be in Mexico spending that gold. Now, what's it going to be?" James whispered to Sarah without taking his eyes off the riders. "When I start shooting, you get behind that boulder to your left. It'll give you cover. James, there's no negotiating with men like this. They'll take everything and kill us anyway. Witnesses be inconvenient. Our only chance is to fight. 3 against 2. I've faced worse odds, and you're tougher than they think." He raised his voice to Pike. "We're not giving you anything. Turn around and ride out, and we'll forget this happened." Pike's reply was to draw his pistol. Wrong answer. James's rifle cracked, and one of Pike's companions jerked backward and fell from his horse. Sarah dove for the boulder as return fire erupted, bullets whining off rock and kicking up dirt. She pressed herself against the stone, her revolver ready. The canyon filled with smoke and noise, the flash of muzzle fire lighting up the darkness like lightning. James had taken cover behind their saddles, his rifle speaking steadily. Sarah saw movement to her right. The second rider was trying to flank them, working his way around through the brush. She waited until he was close, until she could see his face in the starlight. Then she stood, aimed carefully, and fired. The man went down with a cry. Her first shot had caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Her second shot missed, but the third found its mark. He collapsed and didn't move again. 2 down, but Pike was still out there, and he was the dangerous one. The shooting stopped. An eerie silence settled over the canyon, broken only by the nervous whinnying of horses. Sarah's ears rang from the gunfire. Smoke hung in the air, acrid and thick. "Pike," James called out. "Your men are dead. Give it up." No answer. Sarah scanned the darkness, trying to locate him. Then she saw him, moving like a shadow through the rocks on the far side of the canyon. He was working his way toward higher ground, trying to get an angle on James's position. Sarah made a decision. She couldn't shoot accurately at that distance in the darkness, but she could create a distraction. She fired twice in Pike's direction, the muzzle flash revealing her position, but forcing him to take cover. James understood immediately. He moved while Pike was pinned down, circling to cut off his escape route. Sarah kept firing, spacing her shots to conserve ammunition, while keeping Pike's attention focused on her. She counted her remaining rounds, 3 left in the cylinder, maybe 10 in her pocket. She needed to make them count. Pike returned fire, and Sarah felt a bullet pass close enough to her face that she felt its heat. She dropped flat behind the boulder, her hands shaking as she reloaded with fingers made clumsy by fear and adrenaline. She heard James's rifle crack once, twice, 3 times, then silence again. "Sarah," James's voice, strained but alive. "I'm here. You hit?" "Grazed. Nothing serious. Stay down." Minutes passed. Sarah's breath came hard and fast. She'd killed a man tonight, maybe 2 if her second shot had found its mark. The reality of it pressed down on her, but she pushed it away. Time for that later, if there was a later. Movement in the rocks. Pike was on the move again, but this time he was heading away from them, climbing toward where the horses were tethered. He was trying to escape. "He's running," Sarah called out. James emerged from cover and sprinted after Pike. Sarah followed, her legs burning as she climbed. She heard scuffling ahead, the sound of a struggle. She reached the top of the rise to find James and Pike, grappling near the horses. Pike had a knife, and James was bleeding from a cut across his forearm. They were matched in size and strength, rolling in the dirt, each trying to gain advantage. Sarah raised her revolver, but couldn't shoot without risk of hitting James. She circled, looking for an opening. Pike managed to break free and lunged for his horse. James grabbed his leg and pulled him back down. The knife flashed in the starlight, and James twisted away just in time to avoid having his throat cut. Sarah saw her chance. She stepped forward and brought the revolver down hard on the back of Pike's head. He went limp, the knife falling from his hand. James scrambled away, breathing hard. Blood ran down his arm from the knife wound. Sarah kicked the knife away and kept her revolver trained on Pike's unconscious form. "Is he dead?" she asked. James checked. "No, just out cold. We should finish it. He'll come after us again if we don't." James looked at her, and she saw something in his face. Understanding, maybe, or recognition of how much she'd changed in these few months. The Sarah Hayes who'd inherited a worthless shack wouldn't have suggested killing an unconscious man. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone harder, more practical. "No," James said finally. "We tie him up and leave him. Someone will find him eventually. But we're not murderers, Sarah. Not yet." She nodded slowly, relieved that he'd made the decision she couldn't quite bring herself to make. They used Pike's own rope to bind him securely, hand and foot. Then they gathered their horses and what supplies they could salvage. James's arm needed attention. Sarah tore strips from her shirt and bound the wound as best she could in the darkness. It wasn't deep, but it needed proper cleaning and stitching. "Can you ride?" she asked. "I can ride." They left the canyon as dawn broke, not looking back at the bodies or the bound man. The gold was secure. Their lives were intact, but the cost of both felt heavier than Sarah had imagined. As they rode, James spoke quietly. "You did well back there, kept your head, made good decisions. Your father would have been proud. I killed 2 men tonight. You defended yourself and protected what's ours. There's a difference. Is there, or is that just what we tell ourselves to sleep at night?" James was quiet for a while. "I don't know, Sarah. I honestly don't know. But what I do know is that if you hadn't acted, we'd both be dead right now. So whatever weight you're carrying, I'm carrying it too. We're in this together." They rode hard for the rest of that day, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the canyon. James's arm had stopped bleeding, but Sarah could see pain tightening his jaw. They needed to reach a town where a doctor could properly tend the wound. By late afternoon, they came to a small settlement called Pine Ridge. It had a doctor's office, which was all that mattered. Sarah helped James down from his horse and supported him as they walked to the building. The doctor was an elderly man named Henderson, with steady hands and kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. He examined James's arm with professional detachment. "Knife wound," he observed. "Clean cut. No major damage. You're lucky." He looked between them. "Want to tell me how this happened?" "Bandits on the road," James said. "We fought them off." Henderson nodded as if he heard this story weekly. "You report it to the law." "We will, once we reach Denver. Right now we just want to keep moving." The doctor cleaned and stitched the wound, then wrapped it in clean bandages. "Keep it dry, change the dressing daily. If you see any redness or swelling, find another doctor immediately. Infection can kill you faster than a knife." They paid him with coins and stayed the night at Pine Ridge's small inn. Sarah sat up watching James sleep, making sure he didn't develop a fever. The exhaustion of the past days pressed down on her, but she couldn't rest. Every sound made her reach for her revolver. At dawn, James woke and found her still sitting in the chair. "You didn't sleep. Someone needed to keep watch." "Sarah, we're safe here. Pike's men are dead, and Pike himself is tied up a day's ride back. No one else knows about the gold. Maybe Pike had friends, people he told about following us. We're not safe until we reach Denver and secure this gold properly." James sat up slowly, favoring his injured arm. "2 more days, then we can rest." They left Pine Ridge and continued toward Denver. The terrain grew more populated as they approached the city. More travelers on the road, more settlements, more eyes watching. Sarah found herself growing paranoid, seeing threats in every stranger who passed. On the 5th day, they finally saw Denver rising from the plains. It was bigger than Sarah had imagined, a real city with brick buildings and paved streets. Thousands of people moved through its avenues, going about their business with the hurried purpose of urban life. James led them to a building on the edge of the commercial district. A small brass plate beside the door read, "In Ashford, Private Assayer and Securities." Inside they met Marcus Ashford, a thin man in his 50s with spectacles and an air of discretion. James had corresponded with him before, laying the groundwork for this transaction. "Mr. Cordell," Ashford said, shaking hands. "And this must be Miss Hayes. Please come into my office." They followed him into a back room where heavy curtains covered the windows and a large safe dominated one wall. Ashford closed the door and locked it. "Do you have the merchandise?" he asked. Sarah and James unpacked the gold, laying it out on Ashford's desk. 103 pounds of raw gold, processed and ready for assay. Ashford's eyes widened slightly, the only sign of surprise he allowed himself. "Impressive," he said quietly. "Very impressive. This is from your Wyoming claim?" "It is, James. We have documentation of ownership and legal filing." "Good. I'll need to examine each piece, determine purity and value. That will take several hours. You're welcome to wait here or return later." "We'll wait," Sarah said. She wasn't letting this gold out of her sight until money was in hand. Ashford worked methodically, weighing and testing each piece. He made careful notes in a ledger, his expression neutral throughout. Sarah watched him like a hawk, looking for any sign of deception or plans to cheat them. Finally, after 3 hours, Ashford set down his tools. "The purity is excellent, 92 to 94% pure, which is remarkable for raw ore. The total value at current market rates is $31,800. The number hung in the air. Sarah's hands trembled. $31,000. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. Enough to never worry about money again. Enough to vindicate every sacrifice their parents had made. "We want to deposit it in multiple banks," James said, his voice carefully controlled. "Under different names, in different amounts." Why, I can arrange that through my contacts. For a small fee, naturally. They spent 2 days in Denver, completing the transactions. Ashford arranged deposits in 4 different banks, spreading the money across accounts in James's name, Sarah's name. He also helped them establish legal documentation of their claim with the territorial government, paying the required fees and taxes. By the time they finished, everything was secure and legitimate. They had bank books, receipts and papers proving ownership of both the money and the mine. The journey back to Timber Ridge took longer than the trip out. They were tired, and James's arm needed time to heal properly. But there was no urgency now. The gold was safe, the money was secured, and the worst of the danger had passed. As they rode, Sarah found herself reflecting on everything that had changed. 3 months ago, she'd been a poor woman with nothing but a sister to care for, and debts she couldn't pay. Now she had wealth, security and prosperity. But she'd also killed 2 men and been forced to confront the reality of violence in ways she'd never imagined. "Do you regret it?" James asked one evening, as they made camp. "Any of it?" Sarah considered the question. "I regret the violence. I regret that men died, but I don't regret fighting for what's ours, or protecting what our fathers worked for." "Does that make sense?" "It does. I feel the same way." James poked at the fire with a stick. "My father used to say that life presents us with choices, and we're defined by how we respond to them. We could have walked away from that claim, taken Pike's offer, given up when things got dangerous. But we didn't. No, we didn't." They reached the mountain on a clear afternoon, riding up the familiar trail. As they crested the final rise, Sarah saw the cabin and felt something unexpected. Not just relief, but homecoming. This place that had seemed like a ruin 3 months ago now felt like where she belonged. Emma must have been watching for them because she came running out of the cabin, her face bright with joy and relief. She threw herself into James's arms first, then Sarah's, tears streaming down her face. "I was so worried. You were gone longer than you said. I thought something terrible had happened." "Something did happen," Sarah said. "But we handled it. And Emma, we did it. We secured the gold, got the money, made everything legal. We're safe now." Dutch and Samuel emerged from the cabin, their expressions relieved. "Any trouble?" Dutch asked. "Some," James admitted. "But nothing we couldn't manage." That evening they gathered around the fire and told the full story. The ambush, the gunfight, Pike's capture, the successful transaction in Denver. Emma listened with wide eyes, holding James's uninjured hand tightly. "So what happens now?" Samuel asked. "Do we keep working the claim?" "Eventually," James said. "But we go slow, do it right. Hire more security, get proper equipment, follow all legal procedures. There's enough gold in that mountain to last years if we're smart about it." "And what about you two?" Ruth asked, looking at Sarah and James. "What are your plans?" Sarah realized she didn't have an answer. For so long, her only plan had been survival. Now that survival was assured, she had to think about what came next. Building a life, not just escaping poverty. James looked at Emma. "I plan to marry your sister. With your permission, Sarah. I'd like to build a proper house here. Make this mountain our home." Sarah looked at Emma's glowing face and felt her own heart ease. "You have my permission and my blessing." The wedding took place a month later in Timber Ridge, with most of the town attending. Emma wore a dress that Sarah had purchased in Denver, white linen with lace at a collar. She looked beautiful and happy in ways Sarah had never seen before. Sheriff Brennan attended, and even Deputy Frank Morrison came, though his smile was slightly forced when he congratulated the couple. Mrs. Kettering brought a cake, and Mrs. Talbot hosted the reception at her boarding house. During the celebration, Patterson pulled Sarah aside. "I heard about your trouble on the road to Denver. Pike turned up in custody. Told quite a story about being attacked for no reason. And you believe him?" "I believe you defended yourself. I also believe Pike got exactly what he deserved." Patterson smiled. "Congratulations, Miss Hayes. You've done well for yourself and your sister." As Sarah watched Emma and James dance, she thought about their parents. They spent 2 days in Denver, completing the transaction. Ashford arranged deposits in 4 different banks, spreading the money across accounts in James's name, Sarah's name, and Emma's name. He also helped them establish legal documentation of their claim with the territorial government, paying the required fees and taxes. By the time they finished, everything was secure and legitimate. They had bank books, receipts and papers proving ownership of both the money and the mine. The journey back to Timber Ridge took longer than the trip out. They were tired, and James's arm needed time to heal properly. But there was no urgency now. The gold was safe, the money was secured, and the worst of the danger had passed. As they rode, Sarah found herself reflecting on everything that had changed. 3 months ago, she'd been a poor woman with nothing but a sister to care for and debts she couldn't pay. Now she had wealth, security, and prospects. But she'd also killed 2 men and been forced to confront the reality of violence in ways she'd never imagined. "Do you regret it?" James asked one evening as they made camp. "Any of it?" Sarah considered the question. "I regret the violence. I regret that men died. But I don't regret fighting for what's ours or protecting what our fathers worked for." "Does that make sense?" "It does. I feel the same way." James poked at the fire with a stick. "My father used to say that life presents us with choices, and we're defined by how we respond to them. We could have walked away from that claim, taken Pike's offer, given up when things got dangerous. But we didn't. No, we didn't." They reached the mountain on a clear afternoon, riding up the familiar trail. As they crested the final rise, Sarah saw the cabin and felt something unexpected. Not just relief, but homecoming. This place that had seemed like a ruin 3 months ago now felt like where she belonged. Emma must have been watching for them because she came running out of the cabin, her face bright with joy and relief. She threw herself into James's arms first, then Sarah's, tears streaming down her face. "I was so worried. You were gone longer than you said. I thought something terrible had happened." "Something did happen," Sarah said. "But we handled it. And Emma, we did it. We secured the gold, got the money, made everything legal. We're safe now." Dutch and Samuel emerged from the cabin, their expressions relieved. "Any trouble?" Dutch asked. "Some," James admitted, "but nothing we couldn't manage." That evening, they gathered around the fire and told the full story. The ambush, the gunfight, Pike's capture, the successful transaction in Denver. Emma listened with wide eyes, holding James's uninjured hand tightly. "So what happens now?" Samuel asked. "Do we keep working the claim?" "Eventually," James said, "but we go slow. Do it right. Hire more security, get proper equipment, follow all legal procedures. There's enough gold in that mountain to last years if we're smart about it." "And what about you two?" Ruth asked, looking at Sarah and James. "What are your plans?" Sarah realized she didn't have an answer. For so long her only plan had been survival. Now that survival was assured, she had to think about what came next. Building a life, not just escaping poverty. James looked at Emma. "I plan to marry your sister, with your permission, Sarah. I'd like to build a proper house here, make this mountain our home." Sarah looked at Emma's glowing face and felt her own heart ease. "You have my permission and my blessing." The wedding took place a month later in Timber Ridge, with most of the town attending. Emma wore a dress that Sarah had purchased in Denver, white linen with lace at the collar. She looked beautiful and happy in ways Sarah had never seen before. Sheriff Brennan attended, and even Deputy Frank Morrison came, though his smile was slightly forced when he congratulated the couple. Mrs. Kettering brought a cake, and Mrs. Talbot hosted the reception at her boarding house. During the celebration, Patterson pulled Sarah aside. "I heard about your trouble on the road to Denver. Pike turned up in custody, told quite a story about being attacked for no reason." And you believe him. I believe you defended yourself. I also believe Pike got exactly what he deserved. Patterson smiled. Congratulations, Miss Hayes. You've done well for yourself and your sister. As Sarah watched Emma and James dance, she thought about their parents. Her father, who'd spent years digging in that mountain, certain of what he'd find. Her mother, who'd held the family together through grief and poverty. They would have loved seeing this day, seeing their daughters safe and provided for. The mountain had kept its secrets, just as her father had said, but in the end, it had shared them with the right people, not treasure hunters or thieves, but two sisters who'd needed hope, and a man who'd honored his father's work. The gold had changed their lives, but it hadn't corrupted them. They'd fought for it, defended it, and now they would use it wisely. Sarah raised her glass as the others toasted the couple. She caught Emma's eye across the room, and her sister smiled, radiant with happiness. Everything their parents had dreamed of, everything they'd sacrificed for, had finally come to pass. The worthless shack on a forgotten mountain had become their fortune, their vindication, and their home.